Hello, I'm Michael Goodson. I'm the Senior Curator of Exhibitions at the Wexner Center for the Arts. I almost want to say right off the bat that there will be a book signing after this conversation tonight in our bookstore. The Wexner Center for the Artist Residency Award recipient Sarah Oppenheimer has returned to the center to sign copies of the book that we have published on the occasion of her exhibition here. And Nancy Rubins will also be signing copies of the very handsome and thoughtful publication for her exhibition of sculpture and drawings at the Weatherspoon Museum of Art in 2014. On pages 110 and 111 of that book, there's a striking image, a full-page spread of a drawing that will be featured in our upcoming exhibition. It's called Gray Matters. This drawing is a roughly 18-foot by 32-foot corner rounding wonder of a drawing titled Drawing 2005. So these books will be available in the bookstore, and it is our hope that you might purchase and read them, and sign them in between, have them signed. So the exhibition Gray Matters, in which Nancy Rubins is featured, opens to the public on Friday, May 19th. The exhibition transpires almost completely in the achromatic spectrum, and presents the works of, and I'll read the list now, Toba Arabak, Carol Beauvais, Gisele Camargo, Tacita Dean, Via Selmans, Bethany Collins, Marcia Cottrell, Tara Donovan, Marlene Dumas, Michelle Grabner, Josephine Halverson, Mona Hatoum, Ronnie Horn, Christina Iglesias, Jenny C. Jones, Mary Reed Kelly, Toba Kadore, Laura Lispin, Suzanne McClelland, Julie Maritou, Katie Patterson, Joyce Pensato, Amalia Pica, Mikhail Rovner, Arlene Chaquette, Aaron Sheriff, Amy Silman, Zyveria Simmons, Diane Simpson, Lorna Simpson, Avery Singer, Michelle Stewart, Micheline Thomas, Kara Walker, Rachel Whitereed, Carmen Wenant, and our guest tonight, Nancy Rubins. We're honored to have Nancy Rubins here tonight in conversation with the acclaimed art historian and critic Tyler Green, the host and producer of, I think, the best learning and perhaps in turn the best teaching tool I know of with regard to contemporary art, the Modern Art Notes website and podcast. This conversation tonight will, in fact, through some alchemical process that I don't completely understand,
Me neither,
emerge as one of those podcasts in the near future. So listen for it. Tyler Green was presented with the U.S. chapter of International Association of Artist Critics' inaugural award for art criticism for his website, Modern Art Notes, in 2014. The Wall Street Journal has called Modern Art Notes the most influential of all the visual arts blogs, and I agree with that. Green has written for the New York Times, Lens blog, Fortune, and the Smithsonian. He has contributed op-eds to newspapers such as the Boston Globe, the Los Angeles Times, and the Wall Street Journal. His commentary has also aired on National Public Radio's All Things Considered. Green's book on the pioneering 19th century photographer Carleton Watkins will be published this year by the University of California Press. Nancy Rubins is known for her large-scale sculptures composed of mostly quotidian and manufactured materials such as boats, airplane parts, water heaters, televisions, playground animals, cakes, and mattresses. And these works actually draw out the elegant forms that are inherent in these materials as opposed to presenting them in their natural state. And they adventurously confront gravity and transform the objects inherent in the forms into kind of extraordinary visual wonders. Rubins has produced a body of large-scale graphite saturated drawings that she has described as batteries containing and storing the energy of their production, if you will. Nancy has received a BFA from MICA, the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, and an MFA from the University of California, Davis. And recent solo exhibitions have included MoMA and airplane parts at the Sculpture Center in New York, Big Pleasure at the Lincoln Center in New York, drawing, sculpture, studies at the Weatherspoon Art Museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, Our Friend Fluid Metal at Gagosian in New York, and Nancy Rubins' Table and Airplane Parts in Gare-Ladoux in France. Her work is part of numerous public collections, and her large outside sculpture are in the permanent collections and on display around the world, including the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And Nancy has received an honor from that institution of the Distinguished Women in Arts Award of 2013. Please help me welcome Nancy Rubins and Tyler Green.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Before we jump into talking and taping, a couple of quick things. There are a bunch of past Man Podcast guests here tonight, which is all kinds of fun. Kristen Heilman from the Baltimore Museum of Art, and Sarah Oppenheimer and Hannah Seagrave are all here. Columbus is home to Tyler Kahn and Ann Hamilton, who've both been on the show before. So this kind of feels like Old Home Week. Note of explanation on what's going on with images back here. So our conversation is going to be our podcast for the week the show opens. So the people who listen to the show will be able to see all the images on our website. To help you all out, Nancy put together a deck of 51. Well, Nancy put together a deck of 91 sculptures, or pictures, which I thinned to 51, which is, either a big thinning or not much of a thinning, depending on how one thinks of it. And so they're going to scroll behind us as we talk, and as we talk, you will naturally recall things you've seen, probably, that we will vaguely refer to. And so with that, Nancy Rubins, welcome to the Wexner, and welcome to the Modern Art Notes podcast.
Thank you, Tyler. How do you do?
We're going to start with drawings.
Okay.
These enormous, gravity-defying graphite things that give drawing and pencil on paper, or graphite on paper, the presence and feel of sculpture. For you, is there a relationship between drawing and sculpture?
There must be, but it's nothing that I'm really conscious of when I'm making them. Sometimes when I look at the sculptures and I see a shadow on the ground that the sculpture casts, I go, oh yeah, there's the drawing in it. That's it. But other than that, I don't really think of the other when I'm making one. When I'm making the drawings, I have this wonderful paper I get from Arches. It's nice, heavy watercolor paper. And I get literally thousands of pencils that I get from General's. It's a General's Carpenter's pencil. It's a flat pencil that's like a ½ inch wide. And you can sharpen it with a utility knife. And I put the paper on the floor, and I draw on the floor. I can get a lot of pressure on the pencil on the floor, putting my weight onto it. And what I really love about making those drawings is they register every mark in the moment and other elements in the moment, like if there's a piece of crud on the floor, or if the pencil breaks and the graphite goes under the paper, I can get these nice lumpy things embossed in the paper. Or if the dog runs through, or if there's some leaves that are on the floor that fly under the paper, or some sticks, or whatever kind of crud on the floor under the paper, I can get a register of that moment. And what I love about the drawings is that I kind of think, in a way, I think a lot about geology when I'm making them, and tectonic plates and stuff like that, and big things moving around. And I also, what I love about the drawings is that it's just a lousy piece of paper and a pencil. But I'm able, through making marks over marks over marks, this very weird depth evolves. And it's almost like looking at the night sky. I almost think I could put my arm deep into it and it could go on forever, because a very strange depth happens with all these marks when they're layered on top of each other. And you can never, ever see the drawing all at once, because when you look at it from one point of view, the light's falling on a certain way and you're at one angle, and you're seeing the light refracting off all the marks, and you're seeing a particular thing, and then you move a couple more feet to the left or the right or somewhere else in the room, and what you see on the surface of the drawing is completely different. So I really love that about the drawing, that it embraces these funny contradictions of it being very dense and very large and very deep, but really just a lousy piece of paper and some pencil.
Do you think of the drawings practice, do you think of your drawings practice as being separate from the sculpture practice? Do you work on...
I don't even think about it.
Do you work on drawings on the same days you work on sculptures?
No.
Or do you separate those days?
Those are different days.
So why did you separate them?
Because they both take so much work.
They're physical in different ways?
You couldn't do the both in the same day.
Is one of the things they share in common is that scale is important,
Yeah.
that enormity is important.
Yeah.
Is that is that a decision you made early on, that was something that was crucial to the work, or did it happen over the years of doing it?
It happened over the years, but it was a necessity for the work. With the drawings, I was really thinking about part of how these drawings evolved is I was trying to figure out what is a drawing. You know, when I first was a student at Maryland Institute, and prior to that I went to a college in Nashville for 2 years, I did a lot of figure drawing, like, you know, maybe hundreds of hours of figure drawing. Yes, hundreds of hours. And I can draw a figure pretty good. And I kind of studied drawing in that way. And I first started making these drawings when I moved to California to go to graduate school. I went to graduate school in Northern California at Davis, and I went there purposely to study with a particular group of artists who were teaching at UC Davis at that time, the Northern California funk movement. And I had gotten a waitress job that summer. I'd never been to California. It was all quite startling to me. And I had gotten a waitress job in this little village in the middle of the state called Morro Bay. And outside of Morro Bay, there is this big lump of a rock in the water. And it was a boring waitress job, so I'd stare out the window for hours on end looking at this rock. And it turns out it was a volcanic rock. And I was really fascinated that this lump, this big rock in the water, the small island, really one day was a fluid blob of molten magma coming out of the ground. And it became this rock. So I decided, I was really fascinated by that. So I decided when I got to graduate school at Davis, I was going to start building sculptures that enigmatic molten, now not molten, blob that was so evocative to me, what excited, you know, how it excited me inside. So I started making these small drawings that were about 3 to 4 inches big about that thing that I was thinking about. Then I got to graduate school and I started building these blobs, and I was thinking about, you know, I'd never seen adobe before, so I was mixing clay with concrete and straw. And I made these things that were like 2,700 pounds. And they were not very interesting sculptures. And I threw my back out when I built them.
Can I interrupt really quick? Was this in a studio or was this in your apartment in the Mission District?
This was in graduate school
This was
in
when
a
you were
studio.
still in school.
And I realized that they were terrible sculptures, and I needed to go back to those drawings because there was something enigmatic about those. So that's when I started really focusing on the drawing and developing that scale. And then once I started making them, I thought, well, what are these? I was making them on the floor. Are they puddles on the floor? Are they things to go on the wall? And I wasn't satisfied with either of those directions, so I started like hanging them over a rope or building an A-frame structure to flop them over. Are they drawings, are they paintings, or are they things on, I didn't know what they were, so I wasn't really sure. So in my mind, I was trying to break the boundary of what a drawing was and then examine that. Do you draw a picture of a bottle, or do you draw something else, or do you use the pencil and paper to do something else? And so once I started thinking about that, I started thinking about the corner of the room, the ceiling of the room, the floor of the room. Where does the drawing live? And it can live anywhere, really. Can you pile it on top of a pile of hot water heaters? Yes. And once I figured out that they were reservoirs for energy, I realized that you don't have to see them all the time. You can just stack them on top of each other and have the knowledge that they exist and that that energy is stacked in there. So it became kind of a conceptual thing, not that but you knew that that energy was piled on there, and you had a sense of that presence. So is that what you were asking?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's interesting. So it sounds like the scale of the sculpture comes out of the scale of the drawings, which is not usually the way it works.
I think so.
Did you ever make small sculpture? Like, I went through
It's very
lots of
hard for me
Rubinses.
to make small things.
So,
I can't, but I really have to try hard. I'm serious.
so when you moved to San Francisco after grad school, you rented a place in the Mission and you started making things. And one of the things you made was, and now I'm going to describe it horribly, we'll have an image on manpodcast.com, was a kind of flexible concrete wall.
Up there, yeah.
That had rebar at its core and had a plywood form on one side and signs of making on the other, kind of big brushy, handsy movements on the other. Really cool thing. This is early 70s. What did you get out of making that piece?
Well, the great thing is I could push them, and they would waver back and forth.
The actual thing,
Yeah,
when it was
the
dried
actual
and
thing.
finished.
When it was set up
So
and
like,
finished.
ugh.
Yeah, not bleh, bleh, but woo,
Oh, wow.
and and I thought, whoa, I got that concrete to be flexible, and it wasn't cracking. It was just this really flexible thing. And the reason I figured that out was one night when I was in San Francisco, my neighbors and I, it was late at night, we were drinking a beer. They were picking up their mother at the airport that day, and I was dropping off my mother the next day, something about our mothers, and we were up late talking about our mothers. And I looked up, and the lamp in my studio, I had a big cast concrete building with a 12-foot ceiling, and the lamp started swaying, and having grown up on the East Coast, I had never experienced an earthquake. And I saw my big, solid, big concrete building go, whoop, and the wall just moved like a wave. And I thought, holy moly, I had no clue that concrete, that big, rigid, hard building, in the right circumstance can behave in a fluid way like water. So I started thinking about that concrete, and I started building these very thin walls. And what I loved about the thin walls is that I could put up the plywood, put some expanded metal and rebar, and slide the cement up with my hand. And so all the marks of my hand would be registered on one side, and all the little bits that the residue fell down to the bottom became this fabulous anchor for the work on the bottom. And then I could pop off the plywood wall that I had originally pressed it against, and the residue, the marks of the plywood came there. So similar to the drawings, they registered the moment. for me. And it also embraced this weird contradiction that this thing that one would assume to be rigid and hard and inflexible was actually extraordinarily flexible. So that made me very happy.
Was there in your mind some way of a viewer could experience that flexibility of the piece?
No, it was just for
It
me
was just
to know.
for you.
Yeah.
Do any of those survive?
No, they were all made just on, there were many, many, many pieces I made for many years that if I was concerned about saving them, I never would have been able to have built them. So I decided I would give up. And also, it was, again, questioning the ideas, what is a sculpture? What is an object? What is a work of art? Is it something that is precious and it has to be in a frame and you have to save it forever? Or is it something that you can build and it can move you through a time? Because I see the work as tools, as something to get me through a thought process, to help me figure something out, to answer some questions, or maybe more than answer questions, to raise more questions. So at that time, it was worth it to me to be able to experiment with these materials, build this thing, and document it, and not worry about it becoming a permanent thing.
So help me on timeline. Are you already making big graphite drawings before you make this concrete piece? Or
Yes.
you really?
Yes.
So do you think that the big graphite drawings and their fluidity and their malleability informed the concrete piece at all?
Not consciously, by any means, but it all came out of the same person, so it must have.
Do you wish you still had any of those concrete pieces? Do you
No.
wish any of them had made it?
No.
You got what you needed out of it
Yeah.
and you were done?
Yeah.
So what in those pieces do you think survives into the work now, if anything?
Oh, everything I learned from them. I mean, the work continues to have a continuum and a flexibility and the ability to continuously change in a funny way. There are pieces, for instance, there's a piece called Table and Airplane Parts that lives in France. And I finally installed it. I think we installed it for the 7th time or the 8th time. And it lives permanently now in what was this wonderful, in the turn of the century, the French built all these wonderful little train stations in the country. And I have this imagination of people going there with their paints and going to the field and getting out on the train station and, going out to paint. And a lot of these villages were farm villages, and very few people live there now, and the train stations are no longer functioning. There's trees going through the tracks. And they're small buildings, and they're beautifully made with tile that's made over the leg, and the wood is these nice block ends and perfectly proportioned. And some of the Frock in Dijon is now converting some of these stations into these beautiful little art places.
Frocks are the regional art museums in France.
So we installed Table and Airplane Parts permanently there. Table and Airplane Parts I originally built with an assistant in my garage studio in Topanga in 1990. And then in 1992, I showed it in a gallery at Burnett Miller's Gallery in New York. And we tried to take it apart in chunks and make a map and how-to drawings. And that was just an absurd thing to do. And so we rebuilt it in Burnett's Gallery, and I realized, there's no reason to try to save this as it was. The gallery's different. We should just continue. So every time that piece was rebuilt in Dijon, at the Mudam in Luxembourg, at wherever it was reinstalled, it was the same sculpture, but it was a different sculpture. And I'll tell you kind of what I was thinking about with that. Well, a lot of things, but one of the things is, years ago, maybe 1980, when I was still living in New York, I did a talk at a university in Montreal. I think Concordia, I think, was the school. And they had a museum there, and there was a show of Russian work from the turn of the century, or early turn of the century. And it was a collection of a man who was a man who was the driver for the American ambassador to Russia at that time. And he was friends with Malevich and all these folks and had this lovely collection, very small work. And there was in a tureen, in a little glass, case, a small sculpture about this tall. And it kind of reminded me of Claes Oldenburg in a funny way. It looked very funky. It kind of reminded me of that Picasso with the piece of pie and the pie thing, this kind of balancing thing. And you see the sculpture there, and it's painted. And then you see it over the years. And every time it was found, it would be broken. And then somebody glue it back together. And every time it was glued back together, it was in a different configuration. The conservators were always, they didn't have an image to refer. And I thought, wow, how weird. Look, there's 5 or 6 different configurations of that same sculpture, but it's the same damn sculpture. It didn't matter if it was upside down or things were backwards. It was the same work, and that really was reassuring to me to see.
One of the things it occurs to me might make it from those early concrete pieces into the current work is the idea of structural integrity or not.
Oh yeah, that's important.
So of course they're the tension wires that hold a number of the large sculptures together. There is within those pieces the possibility that something could go wrong and that it could all come crumbling down. In some of the pieces, you sometimes think of that, when you're looking up at it. Is that tension, both structural and not, human tension, important or incidental?
Oh, it's super important. It's really important to me that you see this thing standing there and you kind of marvel that it is standing over your head, but yet everything is exposed. The structural integrity is completely, the structure, the elements that keep it existent are completely exposed. So you see all the cables that are keeping each element in place. You're understanding that tensegrity principle, of tension and that's really, really important to me. That's really important.
When did that become important?
Always. It became important when I was a freshman in college and I first started mucking about with clay. And everybody at that time was on the potter's wheel. And I had a friend who was a fabulous potter. And I would sit by her. I was a terrible potter. And I knew it, but I loved working on the potter's wheel to see what the lump of clay would do, see what I could do with it, and then see what made it fall down. And that really helped me understand physics. It was just a matter of physics and understanding what made things work and what made things not work.
So it's interesting that you talked about how in the early work, such as the concrete pieces or in a piece like Mud Slip, Army surplus canvas, and used cups from Coffee Machine, which is this planar thing of all of those components that's kind of wavy gravy. We'll have an image of that on manpodcast.com too. That those works, you're okay with their impermanence, and that impermanence was kind of at the root of the decision not to do them, and that over time, structural integrity, which has at its heart the idea of permanence, became important to the work. Was that a gradual transition? Do you know what led you into that transition?
Structural integrity was important in the early work, but it was not necessary I wasn't interested in saving the work. For instance, trailers and hot water heaters, you see it in that, but that was temporary work, and there was no way for me to save that work or to keep it,
So permanence and structural integrity were just never related?
Not necessarily, no.
Which is the exact opposite of how, say, a builder would think.
Well, I'm not a builder.
Right, exactly. So in a number of these early works, a little later on, the work takes on a shape that kind of hovers between a tornado or an atomic or nuclear cloud, a mushroom cloud. Is one of those associations more important to you than the other, or is kind of the elision between the two the whole thing?
I was most interested in the precariousness of it. That
Of the
was
actual
Worlds Apart.
structure?
Yeah. That was Worlds Apart that you're referring to, and probably Big Earn was the precursor to Worlds Apart. I'll go back to Big Earn. Prior to Big Earn, I was building very thin walls made out of appliances that I stacked. And this is right after the thin concrete walls. And I figured I could build 2 layers of the concrete and the appliances a day before so that the concrete could keep the appliances up. It would set up, and I'd do 2 more layers. And I could build a wall 45 feet long and 12 feet tall and push it, and that too would waver like those concrete walls. And I started looking at that. I thought, well, that's nice, but you know, I want to get more of an eccentric shape. I'd like to start playing around with a cantilevering form. So I started thinking back to the old ceramic days, and I got a blob of concrete on the floor, and I got strings of rebar and planted it in the blob of concrete, and started like a basket. As the appliances went, I would do the rebar, horizontal rebar, and I could make this eccentric and a precarious form that I called Big Earn. And I really loved seeing this skinny little bottom holding up this big yurt of a blob of stuff. And it was only as thick as an appliance, as a toaster, an iron, or whatever an electric appliance would be. So I brought that into the larger form in Washington, D.C. with Worlds Apart. I wasn't really thinking of it as an image of a thing.
You mean like a tornado or an atomic
Yeah,
cloud?
I just wanted to have that skinny little bottom and this big undulating, sexy blob coming off the top of it.
But at some point in building it or in having made it, you must have realized, oh, tornadic. Oh, atomic cloud.
I thought vortex.
Yeah. So there's a you know.
But a vortex is a thing in nature that is in all kinds of stuff.
But all
Not
of these
necessarily
all
tornado.
of these
it's
things.
in your water.
Yeah,
you know.
or dust bunnies or
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
All of these things have a certain violence, natural or not, within them. Did you think of that? Do you think of that?
No.
Was that important?
No, I didn't. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's there, but it's not something I need to put in it because it's so big. Anything big is kind of threatening, you know? Buildings are nice because we don't see the stuff inside them. You know, the skin, there's skin on them.
Yeah.
You know?
So we're talking about pieces made from electric appliances. Those are, you know, things that have a finite lifespan. Paper cups, finite lifespan. As your career went on, you pivoted away from making work out of short-lived consumables, if you will, toward more durable industrial stuff, airplane parts, canoes. Why?
I moved to California, and I would take trips to the town of Mojave.
Out in the desert?
Yeah. And I was looking for a new material because I'd kind of done a lot of pieces with these little electric appliances, and I kind of had worked through it. And I saw a field of airplane parts, and I thought, wow, look at those things. They're gorgeous. They were just parts of airplanes.
Maybe we should just quickly explain why there were airplane parts all over the desert.
Because the desert's very dry, and there are a lot of airfields there, and the government stores a lot of airplanes there,
Yeah.
and also parts are stored there. And I I tried to buy these parts, and it took about 3 years. Nobody would sell them to me. In 3 years, but the government, they were being saved for certain things. And people connected me with this gentleman, Mr. Huffman. And Mr. Huffman had mountains of this stuff, and he would sell it to me for 10 cents a pound at the time. That was aluminum, what aluminum was when you melted it down. And they were just beautiful shapes. I had no clue what they were used for, what they were, but I just started hoarding the stuff and looking at the shapes and started working with that. The first piece I did with those airplane parts was to paint a tree in airplane parts. And I worked around the negative space of this large oak tree on my property and built with the airplane parts.
Was there anything about them being from a plane or from industrial materials or process that was important?
Well, they were beautiful. And I never could have made those things. The materials were just exotic to me. Sometimes I get titanium. The rivets were beautiful. They look like things that you might find at the bottom of the ocean. They were really exotic and evocative to me, and that I had no clue what they were used for was interesting to me. And I was attracted to them because of that.
There's a certain poetry or romanticism. So when one sees any of the sculptures with airplane parts, they're recognizable as airplane parts. Mm-hmm. When we think of airplanes, we think of things going up and flying away. Mm-hmm. Were you at all interested in the romanticism of constraining things that we know fly away?
It wasn't part of my thought process. I think that people bring that to the work when they see it after it's done. But I was really seeing these things kind of as organic elements in a funny way and thinking of them in an organic way.
Rather than as airplane parts?
Yeah.
So it's been many years since you started playing with airplane parts. Have you ever found your mind wandering to where other people's might, to thinking of them in that romantic way? Or
No.
does it just never get there for you?
No.
Never gets there
Right.
for you. You found airplane parts. Canoes, I guess you've both made and had fabricated.
No, I found them, and yes, I did have some fabricated for the piece at Las Vegas because I needed brightly colored boats. That was something that they really wanted, and I had been using some plastic kayaks prior to that for the piece at Lincoln Center. And the piece, people in Las Vegas love that bright, vulgar color. And they had some problems, issues with their buildings, and that it was a huge complex, a 70-acre complex called City Center, and they had all these curved buildings, Raphael Vinole, Caesar Palais, and guess what happens when glass is curved in the desert? It's like a magnifying glass when you're a kid and you burn leaves. So they developed what was called solar convergence. It got up to 550 degrees.
Whoa, that's hot.
Yeah. So I had to really rethink. So I found some folks that were willing that could build these canoes for me and give me these colors that were painted on and not painted, they were baked on at a temperature that was higher than the solar convergence. And
So were the canoes like the airplane parts in the sense that you were attracted to the form rather than to the thing?
We had a canoe on our property, and I said to my husband...
You had a canoe in a canyon?
Well, my husband had bought it because he was thinking of it for a work of his. I said, whoa, look at that canoe. That looks like one of my airplane parts. And he said, Goofus, it's made by Grumman. And I thought,
a military contractor.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then I got it. You know, the ribs, the struts, the aluminum skin, everything just kind of popped in. I thought, God, those things are gorgeous. And they're perfectly sleek pods. So then I just started hoarding the canoes.
Is there a difference? And so often the canoes, such as in the piece at the Albright, Knox, and Buffalo are just silver, and you mentioned the color ones. Is that an important difference for you, and why?
After doing the piece in Las Vegas, I didn't want to
With
muck with
color.
color for a while. I wanted to stay far away from it. And also, when doing the piece in Las Vegas, I had all these monochrome canoes that I collected from Northern California from a canoe rental place. And they were gorgeous. They had really been used and reused, and really the daylights used out of them, and they were welded and re-welded. I couldn't believe that they actually sent people out in the water in these canoes. But they were beautiful. And one day when we were in Las Vegas, it rained, and those monochrome canoes, the used ones, stood out to be particularly beautiful to me. And I thought, that's what I'm going to do. The next work, I'm going to get rid of all that vulgar color, and I want to just go with those beautiful monochrome canoes, because there was such a subtlety in their surface. And when they got wet, they were beautiful, and in the sun, and each one had a different story and a different history. In a funny way, the surfaces reminded me of the drawings a little bit, because every rock that they went over in the river had this kind of beautiful surface. So I had a hankering to do that. So that's when the monochrome series evolved.
You like the monochrome so much that you put it in a lot of the titles. So we have monochrome for Austin, monochrome for Paris, stainless steel, aluminum, monochrome 1.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can tell what artists think are important by, by what they call the work. One of the monochrome canoe pieces, let me rephrase that. One of the canoe pieces that's made entirely out of stainless is the one at the Albright.
Aluminum.
Aluminum, sorry. At the Albright, which is called Built to Live Anywhere, at Home Here. It's a 2010-11 piece. Boy, there's a temptation to seeing that really tense, tight canoe piece in front of an art museum in Buffalo, and to think about Niagara Falls being 40 or 50 miles away. And the importance of Niagara to the place. Did that, either as a positive or a negative, enter into your thinking?
Anytime you put a work that has those canoe elements, the sun is behind the one that's in Paris. Everyone says, excuse me, oh, did you build that because of the sun? Nope. But there's always a body, I beg your pardon. There's always a body of water near or absent. In Las Vegas, there is no water. Oh, is it? You know, you can always make an association. People love making personal associations where they are the center of the universe, and their community is, and your work helps talk about their place and them. And I go, yes, absolutely, it's all about you.
So there's a way to embrace it and a way to shrug at it.
Yeah.
When you, one of the as you've changed the things that the sculptures are made out of, airplane parts, canoes, kids' toys, whatever the thing is, you could have at each point decided, I'm done with the tension wires. I've played with tension wires for a while. Maybe I'll move on from that. Why did you decide to keep them and make them fundamental to the work?
I love them. I love them. To me, that's the essence of the work, really. The other stuff is kind of peripheral, really. It's the most interesting part for me to look at. And it's always a surprise where they need to be.
How so?
Well, again, it goes back to structural integrity. So all of a sudden there's a wad of wire around a certain place because that's the strongest place that everything else is pulled back to. And so these linear things start happening, and in a funny way, it becomes a drawing in space. That as you're working with these elements, that's the continuity that keeps everything going in there. And it makes me think about things in outer space and energy and how things are connected and cells. And it really makes me, it has bigger references to me than than just structure.
Did you have to learn engineering at some level to begin playing with that stuff? I mean, it seems difficult to my feeble oriented.
I call it seat of the pants engineering.
Sure, clients love to hear that.
You know, after you throw a pot and you see it fall down, you get a sense of what allows something not to fall down. So after you work with after you stack appliances in concrete, you know how dry the concrete has to be or how wet it is, you know, to live, to be there. So now I work with an engineer. I have a fabulous engineer. If you ever go to LAX, the theme building is the only building that is earthquake and structurally sound. He completely earthquake-proof that funny George Jetson-looking building.
Yeah.
Everything else at the airport will pancake. That building, sound.
So you mostly fly out of Burbank.
Try to. So, you know, there's an element of it that me and my crew, my engineer has confidence and he can run the numbers on what we're doing. And then there's a part of it where we go, well, we want the steel to be here and we think it should be this big and it's going to go this direction. And he'll say to us, well, the steel needs to be this thick and the welds need to be these kinds of welds. And, you know, he calls out things so that it can be safe living overhead in a public place and deal with the wind and earthquakes and the snow and the rain and everything else. But certainly there have been many large pieces that are living permanently that I did not use this engineer work with this wonderful engineer, and they're doing just fine. But I'm happy I have them going into the future.
Well, speaking of these more or less, speaking of the, let me tidy that up. You have done a number of more or less permanent installations at museums. And by more or less, I mean in the existential, what really is ever permanent kind of way.
Yep.
Such as Pleasure Point in San Diego at the MCA San Diego, which I think is one of the 3 or 4 great permanent pieces at any American museum. Airplane parts at MoCA. Do you, when you're doing a piece that you know is going to be in a particularly public place for a particularly long period of time, that it serves as a pivot between an institution and its public or a city and a public, do you think about what to do or how to make or what to do with that piece differently than you think of a piece that goes to a private collection or somewhere else?
No.
No difference?
No. You know, you can be afforded a certain scale sometimes, but in private collections you can be afforded that scale also. No, no different.
I haven't asked much about art history yet, and I'm a history nerd, so I'm afraid we're going there next.
Go.
In lots of interviews, you've referenced Abex painters and kind of painters of that period of being important to you.
Yeah.
And I can find references to Abex in the work going way back. The explosion outward, density, sculptural objects being used in a vaguely painterly way, or maybe really painterly way, and on and on. But so I've heard you reference 3 different artists over and over again, and questioners often let you get off the hook without asking you specifically what about those painters were important to you. So first up, Philip Guston.
Oh.
Why is or was he important to you?
Oh, I love Philip Guston. I love the later paintings, but I love the early expressionist paintings too. And when I was doing the series with Our Friend Fluid Metal series with the little animals from the little aluminum toys from playgrounds that were being ripped out, and I got them in the cusp of being remelted. And those were made from the melted down airplanes after World War II when the men came back and they wanted to make babies, and so they turned that aluminum into this. And when I got them, they were just getting ready to be melted again. I really see Philip Guston's, there's little wiggly marks. I go, whoa, that's a cross between those early Philip Gustons and de Kooning. And it seemed like I was building a painting in space of these little wiggly kind of colored marks that were kind of wiggling out in space. So that's...
Speaking of de Kooning,
Yeah.
he's another one of the three you often
Yeah.
cite. I think of the three, the other one we'll talk about in a minute is Mata. But of Mata, de Kooning, and Guston, the one that maybe surprised me the most is de Kooning. So what about de Kooning clicked?
I saw a wonderful thing a couple weekends ago. I always loved de Kooning did very few sculptures, but he did
very
the
late.
clam, yeah, and the clam diggers.
Yeah.
And I've always loved those pieces. And I've only seen 2 bronze, and I went to the Nasher Sculpture Museum
In Dallas.
a couple weekends ago, and I was going through, and the curator was taking me around, and there's a fabulous de Kooning there of the clam diggers, but it's a plaster. And I said, he did these in plaster? And she said, no, he did them in very wet clay. He loved using not plasticine clay, water clay, wet clay, yes, wet clay. And she said, and then they were made in plaster so he could see what they'd look like in bronze. He said, but when he made them in wet clay, and she had the good fortune to meet his assistant at that time, and he told her that sometimes they would come into the studio in the morning from the day before, and the clay was so wet, a foot would fall or a hand would fall and be in the ground. The clay would just kind of slip and slop and plop on the ground. And I thought, oh, that's so close to my heart. I just really, and then I thought, yeah, I get de Kooning somehow. The marks and the clay, it just felt so familiar to me. Mata, I think really, I think a lot about Clyfford Still. And for me, Clyfford Still, it's so physical, those paintings. He's kind of, the layers, it goes back to geology and layers of stuff, kind of peeling off layers of stuff and exposing these layers. I love Clyfford Still.
Did you find Still early on?
Yeah, well, when I was a student at Davis, and
San Francisco.
yeah, they're always so we could go in and just stare and stare and stare, and I love Clyfford Still.
It's long not been fashionable for artists to admit finding marvelousness in Clyfford Still, so that's kind of cool.
Why?
I think he's been out of vogue for.
Oh,
I mean, you know, if you
I love
are a
Clyfford
New
Still.
Yorker, which you're not, your line through Abex runs through Pollock, and Pollock is your
How can you not
male
love? Yeah, of
artist
course,
dude.
yeah.
And the Pollock.
Pollock's
people
so
who love
obvious.
Pollock
Who
and-
needs to talk about that?
Yeah. But I think that's true about Still, right? I mean, he mixed his own paints. I think he ground his own pigments, and then he just palette knifed them into existence in a very physical way. Maybe kind of the way you,
To me, those things are almost sculpture.
kind of like you physical the drawings into existence. Is it, well, speaking of the drawings, since I brought them up, we've been talking about the materials that the sculptures are made out of, and I wanted to bring that back to the drawings in the sense that, is it of interest to you that in the drawings the graphite looks like it's metal, looks like it's...
It's more interesting to me that the graphite has this ability that has this. It's not so much that it looks like metal, but it has a density that seems to go on forever. And like Clyfford Still, it has layers and it it's creating space for me in a funny way. Like when you look at the night sky and it goes on forever, you know, that's how the drawings appear to me. So maybe I said before, that contradiction that it can embrace of just being so, just a skinny piece of paper. People refer to it as metal. I don't think of it that way, but I like that contradiction, that it appears to be something very dense.
The surfaces of the drawings and the sculptures are really different. The sculptures are often, reflective is not the word, but light bounces off of them. Mm-hmm. Shiny's not the word, mm-hmm. but they,
yeah.
and the drawings kind of soak it up. Mm-hmm. Is that an interesting thing to play with for you, or are they such separate practices that that's not?
The latter,
mm-hmm.
yeah.
You mentioned earlier going to MICA as an undergrad, mm-hmm. and one of your professors there was Salvatore Scarpita.
Yes, Sal.
So Salvatore Scarpita is one of the
under the radar, fabulous artist.
He, Wikipedia him, but in shorthand, he's kind of the proto Matthew Barney, the guy who believed art and sculpture should be in motion and physical, and he had a race team, like a race car team.
His race cars were sculptures.
Yeah.
And
one
Leo
of them
Castelli,
is
he
museum
had
collection.
Leo Castelli on the side of his race cars.
So did you go to MICA knowing he was there?
No, I went to MICA for the ceramics teacher at the time, and then all the students would say to me, "This guy Sal, he's the real deal." So I went and sat in on to a couple of his classes, and how do you get into these classes? You got to try hard. And you didn't have to try hard, you signed up, and Sal was just like such a huge energy and such a brilliant man, and he was like an opera singer. He had this presence, and he was brilliant. And he had a foot in Italy and a foot in America, and he was kind of the bridge of Art Povera, and and he helped me understand Lucio Fontana and then Lee Montague. It was that kind of a bridge for me. Got it?
Arte Povera to Lee Montague.
No, Lucio Fontana.
Oh, so you just meant that Scarpita was, I got you.
Was the bridge of these artists in my mind. And hearing him talk about those really early wrap canvases he did and seeing them and hearing about how, he'd take them across to send them to Italy, and customs said, "So unwrap it." Let's see the work.
So what?
And that it came, those things were bore out of the loins of his being in World War II. And, repairing the boo-boo, repairing the damage. There was a great tenderness in Sal's work and a transcendence in this movement, in the sleds and the race cars, something that the work would take you someplace. And I understood that.
Did he activate the students around his work at all, whether it was the race team or the sleds or any of that?
No.
You knew about it?
Yeah, and I would go visit his studio, and over the years I saw Sal until not long before he died. I mean, we maintained a real friendship over the years.
We're going to open it up to questions in a few minutes, so be thinking. But before we do, what are the things you're making sculptures out of in the last year or two?
I have been collecting and working with these kind of absurd animals cast out of bronze and aluminum and brass and stuff like that I don't really know what they're used for. Sometimes maybe people put them in their yards. Maybe some of them are used for, signs to sell barbecue, a big pig, you know what I mean, to sell
like barbecue.
Uh-huh.
Really? Wow. How?
They're good.
Yeah,
They're really nice.
but who?
And they're really structurally sound because basically they're cylinders and they're well made so that I can use the stainless structure, but those cylinders are so beautifully built that from there my engineer can measure the thickness and how round they are and how big they are so that, again, structural integrity, figure out how far we can cantilever these elements connected to each other, and they are beautiful. I love working with them.
So some of the animals are boars, alligators, stags,
Anything
deer
I
with
can
the
find, yeah. Horses,
horses.
turtles,
So what? Oh yeah,
hippos,
yeah.
giraffes.
So what is the attraction of the animals? Why animals?
Well, they're animals, but they're just these goofy yard things. So you see them upside down, and then you see how they're made. You see the welds inside. You see the little pads on them. They're not really animals. They're metal things. So, and it's the first time I felt comfortable using such an overt figurative thing.
That's what I was going to ask.
It's always given me the heebie-jeebies. And for some reason, I dove in full throttle, and I'm loving it.
So why? I mean, I can come up with some art historical references
Yeah.
for all of this, and I'll leave that alone for a moment.
Yeah.
But why do they give you the heebie-jeebies? Or why the idea of using
Okay,
something so?
I think everything is figurative. The chair is figurative because we have our butt and our back, and we're shaped this way. That table's figurative, this bottle's figurative. Everything's figurative that we make, even if it's figurative of our ideas. So these things, that's an image of one of them. These things are, so a canoe, that's really figurative. A mattress, that's really figurative. So all these things, but these things are really figurative too, in that they're easily identifiable figures. They're not abstract figures. A hot water heater, that's figurative. But those things are really more or easier for me to work in an abstract form because they are already abstracted. These things are very specific. However, they work. I think because you can turn them upside down and see their underbelly and see the hole in them where the metal was poured, and you see the welds, so that it breaks the illusion of the figure and it becomes just a dumb piece of metal again. So I like it that it flips and flops the brain back and forth. And also I keep thinking of the caves in France and the imaginings. You thought of that too. I know you did.
No, I thought of something else in France.
What?
Antoine Louis Barye.
I don't know.
Those 19th century sculptures he made of, for 30 years of animals attacking other animals.
Yeah.
Which when I first saw the images
Yeah.
for this
Yeah.
recent work
Yeah.
you've made,
Yeah.
I, knowing this was a stupid thing to do because it wasn't going to be there, but I went through them trying to find specific references to specific Barye
Yeah.
sculptures because
Yeah.
it's really close.
Yeah.
I mean, you've
Yeah.
got
Yeah.
stags and
Yeah. I got it.
yeah.
Got it. I kept thinking of grottos and landscapes and making something that was like a grotto that you could sit under, but it was these animals and and the turtles are so huge. There are turtles that weigh 870 pounds. They're just these huge cast iron things, or I think made for goofy fountains. They're kind of, and I've been really enjoying working with them.
Is it? You're not 10 years into your career now. You're 40 years into your career. Are you? Is it safer, or are you more willing to have viewers bring associations into objects like a boar or a turtle than you think you would have been a couple decades ago?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if it's safer, but I feel more confident in what I'm doing with it. So it's not so worrisome.
Because why? What? Not worried because it's you they're looking at, not a bore. Whereas in 1983,
I know that
maybe
they're
not.
looking at metal that was, I know that they're looking at metal that used to be Coke cans. And I figured it out.
Have you exhibited any of them yet?
No.
Do you know where they're going to be seen?
In March of next year in London at the Britannia Space Excursions.
Oh, wow. Cool. Let's open it up. If people have questions, Nancy has said she will answer them. And we will do our best to, there we go. Yeah, back here.
So, a question about viewers' receipt of your work and your sort of position about it. So, I first saw your work at the Helter Skelter show in
Yeah.
Los Angeles, you got some pictures. And it felt like the objects were necessitating a form, that they were leading to a form. But then later, the canoes felt like the objects were fulfilling a form in a way. And that sort of changed my perception on how I was receiving your work. And so that was more like Philip Barlow's book, right? And so I see your black drawings, kind of sculptor making black drawings, and I think about Richard Serra as a sculptor making black drawings. But I want to know sort of the distinctions between the two. Just like Malevich will make a white painting and Ryman will make a white painting, and they'll be diametrically opposed, even though they're both white paintings. So, do you see your work sort of in line with them, or distinct? Are they like Ellsworth Kelly? Are they like like a Nevelson sculpture? Like, how do you, like, for your own view, how do you sort of position them or see them, or do you have hopes for viewers' receipt of the work in a particular way that it takes them so?
Well, it's hard to ignore art history. Nevelson is back there. And that's a reference way back there. But the work isn't that. It evolves and it has its own. Nevelson is very static and, it's there. I'm here. These things are kind of breaking lines and trying to deal with space in a very different way than certainly Nevelson did. I love those pieces, those flat works that Richard Serra does that you call the black drawings in the multiples, but his things are more like a wall. It's a surface, it's a flat surface, and it's opaque surface, and it bounces you off. Where the drawings I make with the gazillions of lines in pencil, it's a deep space, and it takes you into it. It's a very different kind of use of space with the piece of paper. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. That gives me entry to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you ever collaborate with your husband on pieces?
Years ago, we did collaborate on one or two pieces, and they were fabulous
Let me just
pieces.
jump in really quick. Nancy's late husband was Chris Burden.
Yeah. And they were beautiful pieces. Sorry. But at that time, my husband was Chris Burden, and I was Nancy Rubins, but I was not the Nancy Rubins I am now. And all the reviews said, wonderful, all the reviews, the few reviews, the one in San Francisco, the one critic, wonderful new surprise from Chris Burden. And I thought, hey, that's me. And we both realized that it was really fun, and we both loved the piece. They were the two pieces. They were fabulous pieces. But it wasn't good for my career, and so we didn't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to picture what your studio might be because the pieces seem to always start somewhere and have to build off of something, and they're all kind of different in that way. Is that where you begin when you make a piece, that you construct what is going to be the kind of plinth for the...
I figure out how it's going to work in space. I want it to go up there and over there, and I want it to go over that wall, and I want it to go that way, and cantilever over the road. And so then I start collecting the elements that I need to do that with, and I'll make my dream armature of where it's going to work in space, and show that to my engineer, and then he'll design for me the realistic armature. And it's more about thinking of how it's going to work in space and where the cantilever is going.
In terms of sculpture, do you think of yourself as having a studio practice, or are you a post-studio type?
I don't even know what that means.
Your kids talk about it all the time.
I don't talk about it. I love working at my studio. I have sculpture pads outside, and I mostly work outside. That's where I'm always pouring. I have a surveyor working right now and 2 engineers designing a new sculpture pad, so I can have more room. So, I work outside. I used to work primarily on site of different sites, and I'm trying to work on my property and break it, be able to disassemble and ship it out.
One more, yes.
Just a quick follow-up to
Yeah.
that question. You talk about your dream armature. At what scale are you working out your dream armature?
Oh, 60 feet
So
tall.
your dream armature is the same scale as what? I mean, are you doing a model that you then discuss with the engineer?
Oh, is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
About what scale are you working for?
The model? Big enough to work with. The model's sizable.
Do you save the models?
Yep.
Are they welded?
Sometimes they're made out of balsa wood, and sometimes they're welded.
Nancy Rubins, thanks so much.
Thanks, y'all. Thank you, Tyler.